Welcome back, and we're continuing our conversations on the Breathe Pakistan conference. Now, joining me is Valerie Hickey, who is the Global Director for Climate Change at the World Bank, and she has a number of years of experience looking at the environmental portfolios in Latin America, and now is leading global efforts around climate change. So, we're lucky to have you here. Welcome to the conference. Welcome to this conversation. I think one key area a lot of Pakistanis have always been worried about, and it's naturally there's also complexities of climate finance, but Pakistan itself did not have a framework for climate finance or have the nitty-gritties in place, and now it's being developed. A lot of Pakistanis still have this question: what it is, how does it work? So that's where I think we really want your opinion on that. Where do you think, as a country, we stand right now? What needs to be done? And in terms of the support the bank has been providing the country over the last 15 years, and now the new country partnership framework as well, which is heavily focused on climate change. What are your thoughts that what are the next few steps Pakistan needs to really take to broaden and improve its climate finance, sort of the money coming in, and how also it is handled within the country?
So I have to say it's been one of the joys of being able to participate in the DawnMedia conference, Breathe Life, here today, because I've learned so much about Pakistan's own approach, and I'm going to take a lot of that learning back, because we're in a moment where climate change, not the physical weather that's changing, but the responses to climate change, the politics around climate change is retreating. And people are looking for easy answers. And something that I learned very much from the conference today is that Pakistan isn't in the business of looking for easy answers. It's in the business of finding the right answers that are fit for purpose, that are going to deliver a response to climate action that helps lift people out of the path of climate change and the slow-moving misery that is so much associated with floods, drought, desertification, and land degradation, which of course is how poor people experience climate change every day. When it comes to climate finance, I was so glad to hear that in Pakistan, unlike in some other countries, there's thinking about the three places climate finance are going to come from. So often the conversation is just around international public finance when it comes to climate change. The money from the Green Climate Fund, the money in the new Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, money from overseas development assistance. And yet the truth is that's always going to be the smallest part of the pie. And so instead, Pakistan is clearly thinking about what about its own domestic budget, its own taxes and spending, because at the end of the day, this is going to be a huge source of climate finance. One of the things we talk a lot about at the World Bank in terms of mobilizing climate finance is subsidy reform. Desertification is going to take $1 billion a day to reverse. We spend as a world over $2 billion a day in agricultural subsidies that are actually accelerating desertification. So there's a source of climate finance right now there. It's not about taking money away from the pockets of farmers. It's making sure they have the same amount of money in their pockets, but instead of using that money to apply, for example, chemical fertilizer, which isn't necessarily bringing better production on farm, and it's actually giving them respiratory illness, because as you put too much nitrogen-based fertilizers on the land, it's going into the water, it's aerosolizing, people are getting sick. Instead of doing that, they get the same money to use biofertilizers, to think about planting trees on their farms, which improves by a much greater extent productivity without any of the downside of pollution and illness that comes with it. So that's a big part of the conversation, and clearly here in Pakistan, that is a real part of the conversation. We heard, I have to say today, from Senator Rehman, who talked about the fact that no one is coming to save us. The money for responding to climate change is not going to come from overseas. It's going to come from domestic public budgets, and it's going to come from the private sector, including here in Pakistan. Local money markets are already thinking about how can they be part of the energy revolution, because there's money to be made in the energy revolution, the solar revolution that's happening across Pakistan right now. There are commercial returns for investing in these sorts of energy solutions. There are commercial returns in thinking through how do we improve productivity on land. For a country that has 6% of global milk production, the 5th largest beef herd in the world, at a time when the world and the growing middle class wants access to more milk, to more meat, huge market opportunities to do this right. If, for example, the 50% of rangelands in the country that are degraded can be restored. And so this is where private capital is looking to seize those opportunities, whether it's for the energy revolution, whether it's for adaptation and the growth agenda, where there's really money to be made. And so I think those are the places where climate finance is ultimately going to come to fill the $348 billion gap between now and the end of this decade that's needed in order to safeguard Pakistan, a country that didn't cause climate change, but is at the forefront of suffering that slow-moving misery.
You've already touched upon a couple of things, the CCDR, which says 348 billion, and then we have constant thinking that the international public finance needs to be coming in larger quantities. So whenever anyone says that Pakistan needs 40 billion, people just think that, okay, will the IMF give us 40 billion per year or the bank give us? But it's usually the private sector gap that has to be filled in. So from that perspective, the current national climate finance strategy or approaches, there's also this constant, I would say, criticism that a lot of it, Pakistan, the money that it does get is debt. And not just Pakistan, the rest of the developing world as well. How is the bank adjusting to those needs? I know the loss and damage fund is being activated now, but overall, what do you see happening in the next, say, 20 years, which will gradually change this momentum towards more, needs-based financing, maybe debt for nature swaps, all of these mechanisms also coming into play to bridge in this gap?
So there was cautious optimism at the last conference of the party, the big UN conference on climate change in Azerbaijan in November, because of something called the new collective quantified goal, terrible sort of UN-type climate language that nobody understands, but the NCQG, which basically made a commitment from the 23 countries of the global north to provide, as a floor, at a minimum, $300 billion worth of climate finance to emerging market and developing economies every year. Now, an awful lot of that money is going to come in the form of debt. And that's okay. Because at the end of the day, debt is an investment. And you cannot get the type of energy revolution you need without debt. The world, nobody, neither the Pakistani government itself nor governments in the global north, want to subsidize for-profit companies who can already make commercial returns. So an awful lot of the investments in climate finance that are made in renewable energies can be made on commercial terms because there are commercial returns. And that's why for us, it's the use of the relatively scarce grant financing that becomes so absolutely critical. It's figuring out it's a small part of the pot of money, and it always hasn't been used to the best effect. And so it's figuring out who are the communities, what are the community-led businesses that this grant funding can support where there are no commercial returns to what they're doing. Where in the short term it's investing in public infrastructure that's necessary to safeguard a large swath of public. And that's why we spend an awful lot of time working with the green vertical funds, whether the Global Environment Facility, the GF, the Green Climate Fund, and now the new fund for responding to loss and damage, to really help them think through and strategize how to use their precious grant financing as a catalyst, not just to invest in another green project, but to use these as a catalyst to build green economies. One of the cheapest things to finance, which has the largest leveraging impact, is policy reform. It's not easy, it's not expensive, but it's a great use of grant resources where it can push a country to really think differently, create an enabling environment to attract private capital. So that's a lot of the thinking that we're doing in this space and a lot of the learning that we're doing.
I think one last thing that, given that we have this discussion about the Global South and particularly about South Asia right now, World Bank has been doing a couple of things over the past year around air pollution. Then you have WHO conference coming, focusing entirely on air pollution this year. And I think in the CCDR as well, the estimate we put up was 6.8% loss of GDP because of health effects and all of that. And that's all over South Asia, right? And right now it's the epicenter of air pollution. So do you think that the bank's involvement all over the world, what are the sort of prescriptions you see South Asia as a whole can use, not just Pakistan, but looking at India, looking at Nepal, looking at Bangladesh as well. These are, 1/5, 1/4 of the world's population now, and an estimated 1.7 million lives lost due to air pollution every year. So do you think that this is the key area South Asia should be focused on? And I personally, think that this is one of those things that will bring the largest benefit, both in terms of public health and decarbonization. But how is the, sort of bank thinking about this big crisis as well, and what are the ideas that we're deploying right now to solve it?
It's true, unfortunately, that air pollution, particularly in South Asia, sits right at the center of climate change, growth and competitiveness, and human capital development.
Yeah.
Because air pollution is undermining all of them. Nobody is going to move to a city and bring your multilateral company with you if you know your kids are going to get sick with asthma.
Exactly, yeah.
Nobody is going to want to be a tourist in a place where you're feeling sicker at the end of your holiday than before you went. Climate change is exacerbating this. Air pollution exacerbates climate change. And of course, kids who are growing up with respiratory illness, they're going to miss time in school. They're not going to be competitive in a globally competitive labor force. And so this really is something that we think is an absolute must do across South Asia, particularly because too many of the top 100 cities that are facing the world's worst air pollution are here in South Asia. The good news is it is fixable. It is reversible. We've seen this. We've worked with Beijing, for example, a city that had some of the worst air pollution for decades. A city that I've worked in a lot, and it took me 20 years between when I started working and the last time I visited Beijing just a few months ago to realize that you can see past your hand because the air pollution was so bad, the smog was so bad. And what we learned from lessons in Beijing, what we've learned from Mexico City, what we've learned from Los Angeles, these are all huge metropolises, just like we have across South Asia, is that there's basically four things that are key. The first is data and analysis. It's ensuring that we know what's causing the air pollution. Because too often people make guesses and you can't invest in a solution that turns out to be the wrong solution. So data and analysis really matters. The second thing that matters is policy reform. It's figuring out what is driving the behavior, whether it's, for example, in crop stubble burning. Farmers don't do that because they want to pollute the air, because they're getting sick from it too. They do it because that's the fastest way to ready for another crop. So how do we create policy that incentivizes them to do something different? The third thing we have to look at is how do you build credible institutions? Not just ministries of environment who are charged with measuring and monitoring air quality, who have to be transparent with the data to show what they're doing, but ministries of transport to understand what are the options to have better energy efficient electric vehicles, for example. What does that look like? How do you have to think about a tax regime to incentivize people to buy new cars that are electric rather than new cars that are fuel inefficient? And so these are the conversations about credible institutions and working not just with ministries of environment, but in all the affected sectors. And the final thing is investing in infrastructure. So this is something that we've learned is critically important. You have to change your stock of cars. You have to figure out the clean technology and getting industry to change out its technology. We've done this in Turkey, for example. We're working with the State Industrial Bank, have provided a subsidized credit line to ensure that companies who are interested in shifting out of old technologies, because ultimately they want access to the European market and they need to have cleaner technologies to gain that market access, but can't afford to do it at the current cost of capital, we're ensuring that the cost of capital is brought down so they can accelerate that transition. Doing the same in places like the Kyrgyz Republic, where a big driver of air pollution is residential heating and cooling, and that is something certainly that is a growing part of the air pollution problem across South Asia, particularly in cities where temperatures are going above 40, 45, even 50 degrees Celsius. Cooling matters and doing it efficiently. And how do you make money available so that families can buy the cooling technologies they need, or can update the technologies they need without breaking the bank? Particularly important at a time of a cost of living crisis. So these are the ways of doing it. Having the right data and analytics, thinking about the right policies, working with institutions across all sectors, and investing in the right infrastructure and equipment. We found that when you do that together, it takes less than 10 years. And that's why we're so excited here to make a commitment to what we're calling 35 by 35, is to reduce the level of pollution to 35 micrograms, which is still a little bit too high, still more than it should be, but it's a lot less than it is by 2035. And that's a commitment that we stand ready to support the government of Pakistan, because it is the government at the federal, the provincial levels who are going to have to take sometimes these difficult decisions. It's the households who are going to have to spend some money, and we stand with you to make that happen.
So the summary being that you need to be evidence-based, you need to have investable ideas and projects, and you need to be patient, that these things will take 5 to 10 years.
Yes,
So
but they can happen.
They can happen. They've happened in Beijing, Mexico, and even the poster child London smog of the 1950s and 60s. So thank you for those great comments as well. Happy to have you here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yes, and a huge congratulations to DawnMedia, because it takes a lot of courage these days to stand up and talk about climate change at a time when a lot of other countries and companies are stepping back. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Stay tuned for more.